Caravan are not American. They're not even in the United States yet. According to the left, that makes no difference. To the left, there are two groups of people in the world, current American citizens and American citizens who simply haven't shown up yet. If you don't want them here immediately, then you are a monster. Watch.
The President of the United States has decided that a couple of thousand scared, sick, people fleeing violence are a bigger threat to the United States than ISIS.
I spent 2 days with a caravan, and I didn't see criminals or rapists or terrorists.
Donald Trump feeds off of this kind of ugliness and cruelty, and his supporters back him on it because they didn't get the wall, but now they might be able to stop an imaginary caravan.
People have gotten so much dumber in the last 2 years. It's unbelievable. And it shouldn't surprise us that in the face of programming like that, a dozen Honduran migrants have sued the administration for supposedly violating their constitutional rights, even though, once again, they have not yet reached the border yet, and they are, of course, not American citizens. Mike Donovan is CEO of Nexus Services, which is financing that lawsuit. He joins us tonight. Mike, thanks a lot for coming on. And for explaining to me...
Thanks for having me.
Well, of course. A sincere question, and I really am glad that you're here, because it's hard to see what the standing is here. These are people who are not American citizens or not on American soil, and some of them have declared intent to violate American law. How are their constitutional rights, the Constitution of a country they're not part of, how are those rights being violated exactly?
Well, so of the named plaintiffs in this lawsuit, each of them and each of the individuals in the purported class are individuals who want to seek asylum and do so legally. So I think that's an important part of this conversation. But Tucker, it's a good question. The asylum, so we have an immigration law, it's a series of immigration laws, and one of those elements is asylum. And those laws are specific to the individuals in this caravan who are coming to claim asylum. That in alone, it may not be enough, but the President of the United States has taken to making this caravan a symbol of an invasion of our country. And he has taken a great deal of time to defame the individuals who are traveling, fleeing bloodshed in their home countries, trying to find a place where they can live and support their families.
Okay, I get it, but hold on. What does that have to, and I understand you don't like that and you're on their side, you don't like Trump, fine. But what is that, how does that mean that they have a constitutional right that is being violated? What is that right? Where in the Constitution does it reside? As just a normal American, I'm confused. Can you help me?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a right to due process. These individuals are coming to the country. They have, in one way or another, stated their intent to come to the country, and the chief executive of this country has taken aim and attacked them. So what I'm saying is that their standing is very simple. They're asylum seekers. They want clarification. I think that we should respect these migrants for taking
maybe
the
we
time
should.
to seek
Hold on, wait,
clarification.
stop. This is a legal question, so I get it. We should respect them. You're on the side of the migrants. That's your right. I just want to know where my responsibility begins as an American citizen. You're saying they have a constitutional right to due process, but they're not Americans and they're not on U.S. soil. They're hundreds of miles from the United States. They're not here. So in what sense are they covered by our due process protect? Like, this is insane, and you know it's insane. I just want you to admit that it's insane.
No, it's not insane, Tucker. They are claiming rights under the asylum provisions of our statutes that affords them due process rights under that law. We have due process under the law. This is a law that is specifically directed to them. So, of course, they have due process rights.
No, they do. Let me just correct you as a non-lawyer. They do not possess those rights if they're in another country and not U.S. citizens. So if they possess those rights, then, I don't know, the entire country of Nigeria, or pick a country that's poorer than the United States, can say, we want to come there. President says you can't come, and all of a sudden 800 million people sue you for violating their constitutional rights in the country they've never been to?
With all due respect, Tucker, you know that that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about individual migrants who are coming together, who are on their way to the border to exercise their rights under U.S. law.
No, but
due process rights under that law.
It's not different. But hold on, because it's a few.
It is different.
What's the principle? In what sense is it different? What's the principle? If you are a foreigner residing in a foreign country, okay. Well, I don't know if they're en route or not.
The entire nation of If the entire nation of Nigeria were en route to the United States, perhaps it would be apples to apples. But that's what you said. It's not correct. These are individuals coming to this country to seek asylum. Okay,
but first of all, you don't know that. We don't know what their intent is. There are hundreds of, no, actually, you don't. They're hundreds of miles away, and asylum claims have to be made on U.S. soil, either in an embassy, a consulate, or at our border. Okay, that's the law. Speaking as someone who purportedly defends the law, you know that, I know. So you can't actually claim that you're covered by the U.S. Constitution, again, if you're not on U.S. soil and you're not a U.S. citizen. Because if you could,
unfortunately,
no, that is the law.
But Tucker,
it's not an argument, it's a fact.
The courts don't agree with you. There's a court case in the D.C. Circuit that is in the matter of R.L. Johnson, where Judge Boasberg said that the administration can't use deterrence to curb asylum seekers who are coming to this country. I'm afraid that this is an area of law that's already been litigated. I'm not concerned about standing here.
You are incorrect. You're factually incorrect.
I'm not.
The United States, hold on. The United States Supreme Court has never said that due process protection applies to non-citizens on foreign soil. That has never happened, and you know it.
The District of Columbia federal courts have, and that's where this case is.
So
maybe one day we'll get to the Supreme Court. But I think it's important.
But look, here's what's important. Hold on. Here's what's important is that the rest of us know what the precedent is. And so by this standard, anyone in any country who says he's on his way to the United States and is walking in our direction can sue the United States for saying we don't want you? Like, you really want to set that precedent, or you don't care?
If the president, do I want to set the precedent, Tucker? If the president of the United States engages in abusive, violent rhetoric toward a group of people, I want to set the precedent that that's not okay. It's with all due respect.
No, you know what? You're messing with the legal system
because I'm calling the president. This president is behaving badly, and you
don't like the president.
And you should condemn it too. It's not a matter of not liking the president. I don't like
every one of these people, please.
I don't like the president threatening to shoot children with rocks. Do you honestly believe that's okay?
I'm not going to give you more airtime to do a CNN. Do I think it's okay? I want to talk about adult things, like what does the Constitution guarantee foreigners? Is it okay that he's mean? Okay.
It is time now for Night Court. Our legal eagles are here to break down the migrants' case against the Trump administration. Criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor David Bruno, and former criminal defense attorney Emily Campagno, and they are kind enough to take the sides we assign them, regardless of how they may personally feel about this case. But let's start with this. Emily, we have this case. It looks like 6 adults who say they're Honduran citizens who are traveling, 6 children that they are also suing on behalf of. And they are claiming their due process violations under the Fifth Amendment, saying this: the due process clause of the Fifth Amendment applies to all, quote, persons on United States soil and thus applies to plaintiffs when seeking admission at the southern United States border. Clearly, they're not on U.S. soil yet, but they say they're going to get here, and that's when these rights kick in.
You're right. That's part of the multiple issues with this lawsuit that render it just absolutely ridiculous, frankly. One of them is standing. Now, the lawsuit, or the case that the lawsuit points to out of the Supreme Court, specifically references deportation proceedings, that the Fifth Amendment will be construed to afford all aliens participating in deportation proceedings due process. And that's partly the fallacy here, is the fact that, as you pointed out, they're not yet on our border. They do not have that standing under the proceedings, and legally it is not the same thing as an asylum applicant, secondly. And then the second large issue is it's the ripeness of the case, the timeliness. The president's comments, the lawsuit points to it. It hasn't resulted yet in an executive order, although with the military decision, that falls squarely under the exception of the Posse Comitatus Act, which is that active duty military can provide support roles at the border as long as it's not law enforcement. Yeah. The third issue here is overreach, frankly. The courts accord great deference to the president in his exercising of power, as does Congress, which provides to him the authority to prevent classes of aliens, including all classes of aliens, from entering or crossing the border for facially positive reasons, and taking it a step further, that they're not allowed essentially to go behind the scenes, the courts are, to determine whether or not it's legal. So here, there's just multiple issues.
Yeah, let me bring in David on the first one there, or first or second one, about both standing but about ripeness too. I mean, the president says this executive order, this executive action is coming. Should they wait then until that they actually have something to challenge, David? I mean, you know, are they getting the cart ahead of the horse at this point?
I do believe it's premature to file this action. Number one, they are not at the port of entry. And number two, the president has not taken official action. I think whoever brought this lawsuit failed to read the actual United States Supreme Court decision in Trump versus Hawaii, which granted him a tremendous amount of discretion to act this way. but it does bring up some issues. It does bring up some issues. There is a procedure there for any asylum seekers that everyone should be taken in for a credible fear interview. And then thereafter, if they're granted that, then there is a hearing. You know, interesting enough, I read some statistics, U.S. Today printed out that 93% of the 401 asylum seekers in the March caravan, the April caravan, were actually cleared through the first interview. That was very surprising to me. I couldn't believe it because I thought that there were many people taking advantage of the situation. But here, I mean, it does raise some issues. There is a process under our federal code, and if there's no executive action and they're denied those rights, they will have claims for due process violations.
Well, and one of the things that they're really objecting to in this lawsuit is this idea that people caught at the border are not going to be allowed to proceed into the country. They're going to be held in temporary dwellings. Here's what the president said about the plan.
We're going to build tent cities. We're going to put tents up all over the place. We're not going to build structures and spend all of this, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. We're going to have tents. They're going to be very nice, and they're going to wait. And if they don't get asylum, they get out.
In the complaint, not so sure they think that the tents are going to be nice. They say there's no evidence that Trump's policy, position, initiative of placing people in tents in tent cities is in compliance with the requirements that alien children, such as those at issue in this case, are being placed in facilities run by licensed programs that provide adequate temperature control and ventilation, access to drinking water, and supervision as required by the Flores Agreement. I want you both quickly to weigh in on that issue. Emily, to you first.
Absolutely. I think the biggest issue here, again, is the ripeness. Now, what the president says is in an interview, it does not translate to an executive order, an actual decision. So while the points made there are absolutely true, a tent city would have to comply with the Flores Agreement. The fact of the matter is that he hasn't issued or created that yet, and thus it's simply not timely. I do think it's also important to note that in the lawsuit, a lot of the grievances that it talks about is both rhetoric and also things that it is incumbent upon Congress to change. So to me, it would behoove these attorneys to spend their time more lobbying our representatives in Congress rather than clogging the courts with this lawsuit.
Dave, does it stand up against that first hurdle there at the district court where it's been filed?
Well, with the language that you've extracted there, the key term is children. So yes, you cannot put the children in the tents pursuant to the Flores Agreement. There are mandatory requirements in that agreement, and a tent will not be sufficient.
All right. Well,
for children.
That's very specific in that Flores Agreement and decree. And the DOJ says that's not part of what they're going to be doing. They are not setting up tent cities. So we'll see what the reality is as this plays out. David and Emily, thank you very much.
I thank you. God bless you, and may he continue to bless the nation that has showered this land with love for more than 2 centuries. Thank you all. God bless you all.